Okay, hi everybody. My name is Freedom, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about obedience. First, let's talk about what exactly obedience is. Now, the definition of obedience, according to the British Journal of Psychology, is obedience is a form of social influence elicited in response to direct orders from an authority figure. Now, why do I find it interesting? Well, I had two questions that were really hovering over me, and one was, how likely am I to give into social influence? So basically, would I give in because somebody else is around? And does authority have a strong hold over me? The answer to that question is actually very surprising because we will go over it while I explain the Milgram experiment, which gives me to my next point of why I find this topic interesting. I wanted to explore the Milgram experiment more deeply. I know Professor Walker really explained it, and I wanted to kind of study it, I guess. So I kind of did, and it's really interesting. Now, the psychological discipline, this was kind of challenging because to me, I feel like it could be in multiple, but I feel like it belongs under social psychology, not only because that's what it says in our La Lima page, but because I feel like it could be under behavioral psychology because it's the behavior that you are doing, but I feel like it's more social psychology because social psychology is the discipline that studies the social forces that explain why the same person may act differently in different situations. And that's basically what obedience is. When there's an authority figure around, you tend to give in a lot more. And when the unexpected occurs, social psychologists want to know why people act the way they do. So we're gonna go over the Stanley Milgram experiment, but I wanted to kind of talk about who Stanley Milgram is. And he is one of the most well-known social psychologists, and he was a professor at Yale University. I did oh I did know that, but I didn't know. Just reading that was kind of like wow. And then he is known, of course, for conducting the Milgram experiment, which is also the most famous, wow, probably one of the most controversial social psychology experiments that were conducted. Although a lot of what we know today would not be what we know without Stanley Milgram's experiment. So basically, the Milgram experiment, recruit Milgram recruited participants, and basically the participants chose from a hat on what role they will be assigned. But what they didn't know is that the learner was always a Confederate, meaning that they were in on the experiment. They knew exactly what was going to happen. So, but they pose as somebody who does not know what's happening. So basically like an undercover agent. And the teacher was always someone who had no idea about the experiment, what was really going on, all of that. They had no clue whatsoever. So basically, the teacher gets acquainted with this shock machine, and I will show it to you in the next slide. And the teacher has to give the learner, so the person who is in on the experiment, the teacher has to give the learner word pairs to memorize. So example, bread, they have to memorize butter. If I say soap, you have to memorize water, things like that. And with every wrong answer by the learner, so the Confederate, the teacher was instructed to give a shock. And after every wrong answer, the teacher needed to up the shock. But these shocks were, well, I don't know if the shocks are, but I know that nobody was actually shocked, and the screams and the moans and the groans were all a part of the experiment, and the Confederate were just doing that to see how far the teacher would go. So this is what I mean. So as you can see, this right here is the teacher. And there will be a wall right here. And then on the left side in the green, he is the Confederate, the person who's just screaming in agony as if they were actually being shocked. And this is the authority figure. He's the person that tells the person who tells the teacher to keep going if they seem hesitant. And this is so important because this person, the authority figure, is pushing the teacher to keep shocking the learner. And what the teacher doesn't know is that's what they want to know. That's what they're studying. They want to know how far a teacher is willing to go, or how far a person is willing to go when there's somebody around. Now, in the top right corner, there is a shock machine, and this is actually the machine that the teacher had to use. And as you can see on the far right corner, if you really, really squint, it says XXX, and this was the most highest shock available. And surprisingly, 65% of the teachers did go very high up, which is really interesting because that's what Milgram wanted to study. So I have a question to ask you. How far do you think you would go? Now, a second real life, not it wasn't an experiment, obviously, but event was of course the Holocaust. And although it wasn't entirely about obedience. Obedience was a major player in the Holocaust because officers obeyed. They obeyed. So basically, what happened in the Holocaust, if you guys didn't know, is that 500 German police officers were dispatched, and their mission was to round up all the Jews who were said to be aiding the enemy. And when they were rounded up, um, the officers had to decide whether or not they were sent to work in the camps. So if they were able to, they were sent there, or they were just shot right on the spot. Now you have to remember, this is women, kids, children, this is men, anybody was shot. And the chief officer, or whatever you want to call him, at the very beginning offered them an out. Out of the 500 police officers, only 17 officers refused on the spot. And the rest of the remaining officers killed about 1,500 citizens. I think that was like in the first hour or so. He killed about 1,500 citizens. And after a while, 20% of the remaining officers eventually disobeyed their orders, and they just decided they have had enough. And they started missing their shots purposely, or they just went into hiding because they couldn't take it. Now, I wanted to apply my findings to life. So initially, I was interested in obedience because of how much social influence had over people. But the deeper I got into it, the more the word authority came up. So I really wanted to know what authority was. And the way I interpret it is that it's not just friends or family, it's any person or thing that can be viewed as an authoritative figure or institution. So, for example, in the Milgram experiment, it was Yale University and the experimenter itself. So, the person who was telling the teacher, oh, don't worry, keep going. Like, the experiment is needed, is dependent on you to keep going. And it's important to understand that even though I may feel like I could be that one person who goes against that authority figure, the chances are not in my favor, because according to the Milgram experiment, over 65% of the teachers kept going. They just kept going. So, yeah. However, but now that I am aware of all of this, I am aware of what happened in the Milgram experiment, the odds are kind of in my favor because I know that I'm more aware of how much social influence has over me. And because I'm more aware of it, I could tend to just put my foot down and say, hey, no, I don't want to do it anymore, you know? So anything that goes against my morals, I could challenge. And that's my references. I hope you guys learned something from my presentation, and good luck with finals, everybody, and have an amazing summer. Thank you. Bye.